Let us start with learning the meaning of consumer equilibrium. Consumer equilibrium refers to a situation in which consumer attains maximum satisfaction. The indifference curve analysis assumes that consumer is rational who wants to maximize his satisfaction. In the diagram, it is shown the consumer indifference map together with his budget line BL. Good X is measured on x-axis and good Y is measured on y-axis. With a given budget to buy and the given prices of goods X and Y, the consumer can buy any combination of goods which lies on the budget line BL. In order to maximize his satisfaction, the consumer would like to reach at the highest possible indifference curve. The budget constraint restricts the consumer to remain on the given budget line BL. In diagram, the highest indifference curve to which a consumer can reach is IC3, to which the budget line BL is tangent at a point Q. Since indifference curves are convex to the origin, all the points on the budget line BL above or below the point Q would lie on lower indifference curves. At the tangency point Q, the slopes of budget line BL and IC3 are equal. Slope of indifference curve shows marginal rate of substitution of X for Y, while the slope of budget line indicates the ratio between the prices of two goods Px divided by Py. Thus, at equilibrium point Q, marginal rate of substitution is equal to price of good X divided by price of good Y. When the marginal rate of substitution of X for Y is greater or less than the price ratio between the two goods, it is advantageous for the consumer to substitute one good for another. He will continue to do so until the marginal rate of substitution is equal to the price ratio, at which the given budget line BL becomes tangent to the indifference curve. Let us look at the conditions for consumer equilibrium. Consumer equilibrium under the indifference curve theory is subject to following two conditions. Firstly, the budget line must be tangent to an indifference curve, or marginal rate of substitution of X for Y must be equal to the price ratio of the two goods Px divided by Py. Secondly, indifference curve must be convex to the origin at the point of tangency. Let us understand price effect with help of price consumption curve. Price effect is the measurement of change in demand of goods due to change in its prices. When the price of good A changes, the real income of consumer also changes, due to which he would either be better off or worse off than before. Depending upon whether the prices decreases or increases, when the price of a good changes, the equilibrium position of consumer would shift to a higher indifference curve in case the price falls and vice versa. Let us have a look at downward sloping price consumption curve. Diagram explains the situation when the price consumption curve is downward sloping. The price consumption curve for good X slopes downward when the demand for it is more elastic, that is, the price elasticity is greater than 1. With given prices of goods X and Y, a given money income as represented by the budget line PL1, the consumer is in equilibrium at Q on indifference curve IC1 and buys OM1 of X and ON1 of Y. Suppose the price of good X falls while the price of good Y and his money income remains unchanged, as a result of which the budget line shifts to PL2. With the new budget line PL2, the consumer attains a new equilibrium at R that lies on higher indifference curve IC2, which indicates that his level of satisfaction has increased due to the fall in price of good X. If the price of good X continues to fall further, it would cause a shift in his budget line to PL3 and then to PL4. which will give him a new equilibrium position at S on indifference curve IC3 and T on indifference curve IC4 respectively. When all the equilibrium points such as Q, R, S and T are joined together, a new curve is generated which is called price consumption curve. Price consumption curve shows how the changes in price of good X will affect the purchase decision of the consumer, assuming the price of good Y, his taste and money income remaining same. Downward sloping price consumption curve for good X states that the demand for it is elastic, that is, the price elasticity is greater than 1. Let us understand income effect with help of income consumption curve. Income consumption curve explains how the consumer will behave when his money income changes, assuming the prices of the goods and his preference remaining unchanged. In the given diagram, with the given prices and a given money income as indicated by budget line P1 L1, the consumer is initially in equilibrium at a point Q1 on the indifference curve IC1 and purchases OM1 of X and ON1 of Y. Suppose his income rises, due to which his budget line shifts upward to P2L2. With a new budget line P2L2, the consumer achieves equilibrium at point Q2 on IC2 and buys OM2 of X and ON2 of Y. With an increase in income, he will buy more quantity of both the goods, which increases his level of satisfaction. If the income continues to increase, his budget line shifts to P3L3 and thereafter P4L4. As a result, the consumer achieves equilibrium at point Q3 on indifference curve IC3 and point 4 on indifference curve IC4. Thus, when the budget line shifts to the right, the income of the consumer increases. He moves to a higher indifference curve. Now, if various points Q1, Q2, Q3 and Q4 showing consumers' equilibrium at various levels of income are joined together, it will generate a new curve called income consumption curve. Thus, income consumption curve is the locus of equilibrium points at various levels of consumers' income. The income effect can either be positive or negative. Income effect for a good is positive when the increase in income leads to rise in demand for that good. This would happen in case of normal goods. However, for some goods, the income effect is negative. Such goods for which income effect is negative are called inferior goods. On the other hand, if the demand for a good increases more than proportionate to the increase in income, it is called a luxury good. Let us understand the Engel curve. A 19th century German statistician Ernst Engel empirically examined the family budget and the pattern of consumption expenditure on different goods by the households. His conclusion established that as the income increases, the proportion of expenditure on necessities such as food falls and purchase of luxuries increases. This change in the pattern of consumption expenditure has been called Engel's law. To draw an Engel's curve from income consumption curve, income is measured on y-axis and quantity of goods bought on the x-axis. Panel A of the diagram shows indifference map which represents the preference of a consumer and the price of good X and Y. The income consumption curve shows the equilibrium levels R, S, T of different quantities of good X purchased by the consumer at different level of income, that is rupees 300, rupees 400 and rupees 500. Panel A of diagram shows that when the income is rupees 300, the consumer buys OQ quantity of good X. In panel B of the diagram, the level of income is represented on the vertical axis y-axis and the quantity purchased of good X is represented on the horizontal axis, the x-axis. A point R is directly plotted to indicate OQ1 against income level of rupees 300. Similarly, point S and T represent the quantity Q2 and Q3 purchased when the income increases to rupees 400 and 500 respectively. A curve drawn through the points R, S and T is called Engel curve in case of necessities. It may be noted that like income consumption curve, the Engel's curve will also take different shape in case of luxury goods, inferior goods and neutral goods. Now let us learn derivation of individual demand curve from indifference curve analysis. In indifference curve analysis, the demand curve is derived without taking into consideration the assumptions of Marshallian demand curve, which assumes that utility is cardinally measurable and marginal utility of income remains constant. The derivation of an individual demand curve for indifference curve analysis can be explained with the help of demand schedule and a diagram. Suppose a consumer has an income or budget of rupees 300 to buy a good X. As per the demand schedule presented in the table, the budget line PL1 shows that the price of good X is rupees 15 per unit. As the price of good X falls from rupees 15 to rupees 10, the budget line shifts to PL2. Similarly, the budget line PL3 and PL4 are the relevant budget lines when the price of good X falls to rupees 7.5 and rupees 6 respectively. Thus, the different budget line become relevant for decision by the consumer to buy good X when there is a change in the price of X. In diagram, when the tangency point of indifference curves at various budget lines are joined together by a line, it takes the shape of price consumption curve. The price consumption curve shows the quantity of good X demanded at different prices at budget line PL1. The consumer is in equilibrium at point Q1 on the price consumption curve where budget line PL1 is tangent to indifference curve IC1. In equilibrium level at Q1, the consumer will buy OA units of good X. The lower part of diagram shows that the consumer demands OA unit of goods X when its price is rupees 15. Subsequently, a fall in price to rupees 10 would lead to a shift in budget line to PL2 and equilibrium point Q2, at which the consumer purchases OB unit of good X. The lower part of diagram shows that OB unit of good X are bought at price rupees 10. Likewise, with budget line PL3 and PL4, the consumer will be in equilibrium at point Q3 and Q4 of the price consumption curve. Price consumption curve and his demand for good X will be OC units at price rupees 7.5 and OD units at price rupees 6 respectively. Thus, a price consumption curve provides required information to draw the demand curve for good X at various prices. Lower part of diagram shows the demand for good X on the x-axis and the price per unit of X is measured on y-axis. In order to derive the demand curve, various points K, L, S and T representing the corresponding equilibrium points Q1, Q2, Q3 and Q4 on the upper part of the diagram are plotted considering different prices of good X as given in the demand schedule, which was used to draw the upper part of diagram. By joining the points K, L, S and T, a demand curve DD is generated. Let us understand substitution effect. Substitution effect is based on the principle that when price rises, consumers will replace more expensive goods with cheaper substitutes. There are two different concepts of substitution effect. One was developed by Hicks and Allen, and the second was developed by E. Slutsky. Let us now see Hicksian substitution effect. Hicksian substitution effect occurs when a change in price is accompanied by substantial change in money income, so that the consumer is neither better off nor worse off than before, due to which he reaches at the original level of satisfaction. Thus, Hicksian substitution effect takes place on the same indifference curve as explained in the diagram. With the money income and given prices of the goods X and Y as shown by the budget line PL, the consumer is in equilibrium at point Q on the indifference curve IC, where he purchases OM of good X and ON of good Y. Suppose the price of X while the price of Y remains unchanged, due to which the budget line shifts to PL dash. With a fall in the price of X, the real income of consumer would increase. In order to find the substitution effect, this gain in real income should be removed by reducing the money income of consumer, which forces him to remain on the same indifference curve IC, on which he was before the change in price of good X. When some money is taken away from consumer in order to nullify the gain in real income, then his budget line, which shifted to position PL dash, should now shift backward in such a way so that it remains parallel to PL dash. Thus, the new budget line AB, that is parallel to PL dash, would be drawn at some distance from PL dash, so that it touches the indifference curve IC. This indicates the reduction in consumer income by PA in terms of Y or L dash B in terms of X. That keeps him on the same IC. PA or L dash B is the compensating variation in income. Now, the budget line AB represents the new relative prices of X and Y, which were obtained when the price of X had fallen compared to the budget line PL. Good X is relatively cheaper at the new budget line AB. Now, the consumer is in equilibrium at point T and is now buying OM dash quantity of X and ON dash quantity of good Y. Therefore, movement from Q to T represents the Hicksian substitution effect. Now, we see Slutsky substitution effect. In Slutsky approach, the income is reduced or increased, as the case may be, by the amount which leaves the consumer to be just able to purchase the same combination of goods which he was buying at old price. Thus, in Slutsky substitution effect, the income is reduced or increased not by compensating variation as in case of Hicksian substitution effect, but by the cost difference. Slutsky substitution effect is illustrated in the diagram. With a given money income and the given prices of goods as represented by the price line PL, the consumer is in equilibrium at Q on the indifference curve IC1 and buys OM of X and ON of Y. Suppose the price of X falls while the price of Y and money income of the consumer remains unchanged due to the fall in price of X, and the price line shifts to PL dash, and the real income or the purchasing power of the consumer will increase. In order to measure the Slutsky substitution effect, the money income of the consumer must be reduced by the cost difference, so that he is just able to buy the earlier combination of Q if he desires. For this, a price line GH which is parallel to PL dash and passes, due to which he can buy the combination Q, since Q also lies on the price line GH. The change in relative price will induce the consumer to rearrange his purchases. Therefore, the consumer will substitute X for Y. In Slutsky substitution effect, a rational consumer does not move along the same indifference curve IC1, because the price line or the budget line GH on which the consumer has to remain is not tangent to the indifference curve IC1. However, the price line GH is tangent to the higher indifference curve IC2 at point S. Therefore, the consumer will now be in equilibrium at a point S on IC2. This movement from Q to S represents Slutsky substitution effect. To summarize at the end, consumer equilibrium is a situation where a consumer attains maximum satisfaction out of the consumption of given goods. The indifference curve analysis explains how maximum satisfaction could be achieved with given prices of goods and a given budget for the purchase of such goods. The application of indifference curve approach is based on certain assumptions and conditions. Indifference curves are used extensively to examine price effects, income effects, and substitution of effects on consumer behavior. Thank you.